Welcome back to the Nightmare Network, where we dive deep into the most terrifying true stories that Hollywood doesn't want you to know. I'm your host, and today we're uncovering the real horror behind one of the most famous movies ever made. But before we begin, if you're brave enough to handle the truth about the supernatural, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, what if I told you that everything you thought you knew about The Exorcist was wrong? What if the movie wasn't based on a fictional story, but on real events so terrifying that the Catholic Church tried to bury them forever? In 1949, in a quiet suburban home in Maryland, a 14-year-old boy began speaking in ancient languages he'd never learned, moving objects without touching them, and carving words into his own flesh with invisible claws. Medical experts were baffled. Scientists had no explanations. And what happened next would become the most documented case of demonic possession in modern history. The boy's name was Roland Doe, and his story is about to destroy everything you think you know about the boundaries between our world and hell itself. Mount Rainier, Maryland. January 1949. Snow covered the quiet streets of this middle-class neighborhood where the Mannheim family lived what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary life. There was the father, a government worker, the mother, a devoted housewife, and their 14-year-old son, Roland, a quiet, well-behaved Lutheran boy who loved baseball cards and comic books. But Roland had developed an obsession that would open a doorway to nightmare. His Aunt Harriet, his mother's sister, was what people politely called eccentric. She claimed to be a spiritualist who could communicate with the dead using a Ouija board. During her visits, she would mesmerize young Roland with stories of the spirit world, teaching him how to use the board to contact souls beyond the veil. Roland was fascinated. Here was a way to peek behind the curtain of death itself. When Aunt Harriet died suddenly in January 1949, Roland was devastated, but he remembered what she had taught him. Night after night, he would sneak into his room, place his fingers on the planchette, and desperately call out to his beloved aunt. "Aunt Harriet, are you there? Please, I need to talk to you." For weeks, nothing happened. The board remained silent. Roland's grief turned to desperation. He began pleading with any spirit that might be listening. That was his first mistake. Because something was listening. And it wasn't Aunt Harriet. The first sign came on a cold February night. Roland was lying in bed when he heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from inside the walls. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like fingernails dragging across wood. Mrs. Mannheim assumed it was mice. Mr. Mannheim called an exterminator. But the scratching continued, night after night, growing louder and more insistent. Then Roland's bed started shaking. At first, it was just a gentle tremor, like a minor earthquake. But soon the entire bed would rock violently from side to side, lifting off the floor and slamming back down. It happened every night at exactly 11 p.m., lasting for hours. The Mannheims were practical people. They checked the house's foundation. They examined the bedroom for any structural issues. they found nothing that could explain what was happening. But the worst was yet to come. One morning, Mrs. Mannheim found Roland in his bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror. Across his chest, carved deep into his flesh as if by invisible claws, was a single word: Louis. Roland had no memory of how it got there. The cuts were too precise, too deep for him to have made himself. And why would he carve the name of a city he'd never visited? The scratching in the walls became constant. Furniture in Roland's room would slide across the floor by itself. His clothes would fly out of drawers and scatter around the room. Cold spots would appear randomly throughout the house, dropping the temperature by 30 degrees in seconds. Desperate, the Mannheims contacted their Lutheran minister, Reverend Luther Schulze. He was a rational man, skeptical of supernatural claims. But when he came to witness what was happening to Roland, his faith in the natural order of things was shattered forever. During Reverend Schulze's visit, Roland's mattress tilted completely vertical while the boy was still lying on it, defying gravity. A heavy armchair slid 9 feet across the room, stopping just inches from the terrified minister. As they watched in horror, fresh scratches appeared on Roland's arms, spelling out profane words. Reverend Schulze had seen enough. He told the family there was only one institution equipped to deal with this kind of supernatural crisis: the Catholic Church. Father Edward Hughes was the first Catholic priest called to examine Roland. What he encountered challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. During his initial visit, Roland went into a violent trance. His eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. His voice changed completely, becoming deep and guttural, speaking in fluent Latin despite the boy having never studied the language. "I am the one who possessed the priest," the voice said. "I am the demon who drove him to madness in 1500s France." Father Hughes tried to perform a blessing, but before he could finish the prayer, an unseen force hurled a heavy wooden prayer kneeler across the room. It struck the priest in the face, breaking his nose. Blood poured down his cheeks as he realized they were dealing with something far beyond his experience. The Catholic Church brought in Father William Bodern, a Jesuit priest experienced in dealing with cases of alleged demonic possession. Father Bodern had investigated dozens of similar claims over the years, always finding rational explanations. But Roland Doe would test every assumption he'd ever made about the supernatural. From the moment Father Bodern entered the Mannheim house, he knew this case was different. The temperature in Roland's room was a constant 40 degrees, even though it was heated. Electronic devices would malfunction within minutes of being brought near the boy. And Roland himself seemed to be fighting a war within his own body. One moment he would be the sweet, confused teenager his parents knew. The next, his face would contort into something inhuman, his voice dropping several octaves as he spoke in languages that shouldn't exist. The entity possessing Roland demonstrated knowledge that was impossible for a 14-year-old boy to possess. It revealed intimate secrets about the priests' lives, their childhood traumas, their hidden sins, their deepest fears. It spoke fluent Latin, ancient Greek, and what linguistic experts later identified as Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus Christ. But it was the physical manifestations that truly terrified everyone who witnessed them. During exorcism sessions, Roland would levitate completely off his bed, his body floating 3 feet in the air while contorting at angles that should have broken his bones. Objects around the room would fly through the air as if hurled by invisible hands. The walls themselves would shake and groan, as if the house was trying to expel whatever evil had invaded it. Father Raymond Bishop, who assisted in the exorcism, kept detailed notes throughout the ordeal. His documentation reads like a descent into madness. On March 8th, he wrote, "The boy spoke continuously in Latin for 6 hours, reciting blasphemous versions of Catholic prayers. His bed shook so violently it moved across the room, leaving deep gouges in the wooden floor." On March 11th, Roland's body temperature spiked to 110 degrees, then dropped to 95 degrees within minutes. When holy water touched his skin, it sizzled and steamed like acid. On March 16th, the most terrifying incident occurred. During the exorcism ritual, Roland somehow broke free from the leather restraints that held him to the bed. With superhuman strength, he grabbed a bed spring that had worked loose and slashed Father Bodern's arm from wrist to elbow, requiring 28 stitches. As the priest's blood pooled on the floor, the demon inhabiting Roland's body laughed, a sound so inhuman that Father Bishop later wrote, "It was like hearing the gates of hell creak open." The family was desperate. Roland was wasting away, his body unable to sustain the constant battle raging within it. His parents made a decision that would lead to the final, most terrifying chapter of this nightmare. They would take Roland to St. Louis, Missouri, where his cousin lived. Perhaps a change of location would help. It was the worst decision they could have made. The scratches on Roland's chest had spelled out St. Louis weeks before the family had even considered traveling there. Whatever was possessing the boy had been planning this all along. In St. Louis, the manifestations became more violent than ever. Father William Bodern and Father Walter Halloran took over the case, and what they documented defies every law of physics and medicine. Roland would levitate so high he would hit the ceiling, his body spinning slowly in the air while he spoke in tongues. The temperature in the room would fluctuate wildly, scorching hot one moment, freezing cold the next. Windows would shatter without warning. The house itself would shake like it was experiencing constant earthquakes. Father Halloran, a former college athlete weighing over 200 pounds, tried to hold Roland down during one session. The possessed boy, who normally weighed 120 pounds, threw the grown man across the room with one hand. Father Halloran later described Roland's strength as superhuman, like trying to restrain an enraged gorilla. But it was the psychological torture that nearly broke everyone involved. The demon would speak in Roland's aunt's voice, perfectly mimicking her speech patterns and mannerisms. It would beg the family to stop the exorcism, claiming that the priests were hurting Roland. Then, moments later, it would switch back to its own voice, describing in graphic detail how it planned to kill everyone in the room. Fresh scratches would appear on Roland's body daily, carved by invisible claws. Words like hell, evil, and Satan would be etched into his flesh, sometimes appearing letter by letter as witnesses watched in horror. Dr. George Hahn, a psychiatrist brought in to examine Roland, could find no medical explanation for what he witnessed. In his official report, he wrote, The phenomena I observed cannot be explained by any known psychological or medical condition. The boy appears to be genuinely possessed by a malevolent entity. For 35 days, the exorcism continued. Roland would have brief moments of clarity where his own personality would surface, begging his parents to make the pain stop. These glimpses of the real Roland were almost worse than the demonic manifestations, because they reminded everyone that somewhere inside this nightmare was a terrified child. The Catholic Church brought in additional priests to work in shifts, afraid that prolonged exposure to the entity might result in one of them becoming possessed as well. Father Bodern later admitted that there were moments when he questioned his own sanity, wondering if he was experiencing some kind of shared psychotic episode. But the physical evidence was undeniable. Multiple witnesses, including doctors, psychiatrists, and other medical professionals, documented the phenomena. Photographs were taken of the scratches appearing on Roland's body. Temperature readings were recorded. The church's investigation was the most thorough documentation of alleged supernatural activity in modern history. Finally, on April 18, 1949, after weeks of hell on earth, something changed. During what would be the final exorcism session, Roland suddenly sat bolt upright in bed. The oppressive presence that had filled the room for months seemed to lift all at once. In a clear, strong voice, his own voice, Roland said, "He's gone." The silence that followed was deafening. After months of constant supernatural activity, the house felt normal again. Roland looked around confused, asking why everyone was staring at him. When they told him about the past 3 months, he had no memory of any of it. The last thing he remembered was using the Ouija board to contact his Aunt Harriet. The nightmare was over, or so they thought. The Catholic Church immediately classified all records of the Roland Doe case. The family was given new identities and relocated to protect their privacy. The priests involved were sworn to absolute secrecy. For over 20 years, the only evidence that any of this had happened were the permanent scars on Roland's body and the trauma that haunted everyone who witnessed it. But in 1971, author William Peter Blatty learned about the case through a friend who was a Jesuit priest. Blatty spent years researching the story, interviewing the surviving witnesses, and piecing together what really happened. His novel, The Exorcist, was his attempt to tell the world the truth, disguised as fiction to protect the identities of those involved. Father Walter Halloran, one of the last surviving priests from the case, finally broke his silence in 2005, shortly before his death. In his final interview, he confirmed that everything in the church's classified records was true. The levitation, the supernatural strength, the speaking in ancient languages, the manifestation of scratches and words on Roland's body, all of it happened exactly as documented. Roland Doe went on to live a remarkably normal life. He became a NASA engineer, married, had children, and never spoke publicly about his childhood ordeal. According to those close to the case, he genuinely has no memory of his possession and prefers to keep it that way. But the scars remain on his body, permanent reminders of those 3 months when hell invaded Earth. The house in St. Louis where the final exorcism took place still stands today. Neighbors report that it remains unnaturally cold, even in the summer heat. Electronic devices malfunction when brought inside. And sometimes, late at night, people claim to hear scratching sounds coming from within the walls. The Catholic Church has performed thousands of exorcisms throughout its history, but the Roland Doe case remains unique. It's the most thoroughly documented, most rigorously investigated, and most witnessed case of alleged demonic possession ever recorded. Multiple priests, doctors, family members, and neighbors all saw the same impossible phenomena over the course of months. The case established many of the protocols the Church still uses today for investigating claims of possession. It also highlighted the very real dangers faced by those who open doors to the supernatural world without understanding what they're inviting in. Whatever possessed Roland Doe was real, powerful, and malevolent beyond human comprehension. And according to the Church's own records, it was just one of countless entities that exist in the darkness between worlds, waiting for an invitation to cross over. The next time you see a Ouija board at a party or in a store, remember Roland's story. Remember that some doors once opened can unleash horrors beyond imagination. And remember that what comes through is always hungry for more than just conversation. The Roland Doe case proves that there are forces in this universe that we don't understand. Forces that can invade our world when we least expect it. The question isn't whether the supernatural exists. The Church's own records prove that it does. The question is, are you prepared for what happens when it finds you? If this story sent chills down your spine, make sure you're subscribed to the Nightmare Network because we have dozens more true horror stories that will keep you awake at night. Hit that like button if you want to see more real cases of demonic possession, and let me know in the comments. Do you believe Roland Doe was truly possessed? Or is there a rational explanation for everything that happened? Until next time, remember that the darkness is always watching, always waiting, and sometimes it's already inside.